once the psyche is fragmented, you can operate in different domains and be totally unconscious of one personality, maybe the personality you have during the day versus the personality that you have during the night.
And this is an area where I was right on the Apache reservation. White Mountain Apache Reservation is 100 yards from my door, out into the Apache reservation to these specific high places and do these rituals and this ritual magic. And a lot of that involved, that was when it was the worst to me, because I was old enough to understand how vile what was happening, you know, in ritual magic.
Literally being underground is often indicative of where these rituals take place. So they commune with them at the high places, and then they go underneath as well.
O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
Let's just get straight into it and kind of let Nathan Reynolds introduce himself and what it is that we're going to be getting into. So here we go.
What we're going to do is we're going to do an overtime show. So the first half, what we're going to do is going to focus on your family history, your childhood up into, I guess, adult life. And we're going to let you kind of steer the ship, but kind of getting your story out there in as full context as possible. Like I told you before, there is no handcuffs and there's no handcuffs on time. So feel free to just talk and share. And then we'll migrate into more of your military experience, because it kind of goes hand in hand from what I understand. But you started sharing some things with me about feral people and creatures being created and kill teams and all this stuff. I'm just like, what in the world did I get myself into? I'm just super excited. So with that said, man, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah,
really,
man.
Absolutely.
So you come from a family that I've seen described online. I don't know if you describe it this way, but you come from a family that people describe it as Illuminati family. Is that how you would describe it?
That's not how I would describe it in the same way. I'll be honest. It's I think it's just a popular catchphrase that a lot of people are borrowing into. No, I come from a family that they believe they are descendants of the old gods. That's the best way to say it. That they believe that they are carriers of a seed line that gives them the divine right to rule. And that is what gives them justification spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, scientifically to dominate the lesser species known as humans. Humans literally means a lesser species of man. And they do not believe they are a human in the same way. They believe they are something other than. And that's descendants of this hierarchical ruling species that is from the celestial realm that descended in the days of Jared and came down and procreated with the daughters of men. And that they still trace their seed line back to Gilgamesh, till Nimrod. And so this is what the dynastic families believe they have, is a superiority in their genetics on one side and the ability to commune with the divine. And so their children are progenitors of these, some might call them abreactions, mutations, these skills, psychic abilities, that kind of stuff. All variants of it. And so they raise up their children in this path with which involves a tremendous amount of shattering of the soul and the identity, so that there's compartmentalization within, and it allows them the ability to train their child up in a way that makes them conducive towards the family. I call them the family. That's what I call them. You know, it's a better word for mafia than anything else. But no, we didn't call ourselves, like my family wouldn't ever call themselves Illuminists. Yeah. Right? They're Luciferian, that's for certain. They worship Hallel and Shahar, as he's really known, but different reasons than what people are ascribed to, you know.
Interesting. All right. So I want you to start from the beginning of what your childhood was like and just walk us through this. But before you do, you just said something that I got to ask you before I forget. What they believe, do you believe is true in the sense of them being able to trace back their lineage to the fallen?
Some of them, yes. I believe they absolutely can.
Do you think that's in your blood?
I believe it was, yeah. I believe it is.
Yeah.
I believe there's no way to physiologically necessarily, my blood's been augmented a lot over the years. I volunteered for a lot of stuff and said yes to everything that they could ever give me that would make me better than what I was. I was on a desperate quest for relief. And so I volunteered for all kinds of stuff, and I volunteered for stuff that was transhuman in its nature.
Really?
And it augmented me quickly, you know, and that was brutal, because then there's this, I lived a lot longer than I expected. Let me just put it that way. I did not think I would ever see 18. Never even comprehended the idea that I would ever know a family that wasn't this other thing, where the powers of control and access were given through the abuse of children. That's what I knew was normal. And I knew that people were corrupt and monsters and were willing to devour each other to rise to the top. I understood what wolves were when they ran the world. And so it was very hard for me to get to a place where I could believe that I could be redeemed, because I had witnessed enough of things in the families that make it seem like I am irredeemable forever. And it took me, there was one book that made a massive difference in that, which was called The Gospel to Every Creature. And I believe it's written by John Darnell. It is very hard to find. I have a copy, but it's been scrubbed. And it's the good news to Nephilim, vampires, and transhumans, you know, and it helped me to see that maybe I wasn't anathema, that maybe just because I have the seed line in me, that maybe just because I'm a progenitor of the offspring of the fallen, that it doesn't mean that I'm not able to be redeemed, because no matter what, by blood or by belief, I believe that we have a Messiah that overcame and we can overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony, and not living our lives when faced with death. And it was that powerful encounter with the Almighty, with the true judge of all the earth, who I can make an appeal to, who can give me a new bloodline, you know, and that's what he offers to everyone. And so I do believe that's available to those that come from these families.
That's wild.
And glory to God for that. So again, Nathan Reynolds is a convert to Christianity. Now he grew up, he was going to talk a little bit more about it. He kind of grew up nominally Christian. His mother was Catholic and all that different stuff. But what he's hitting at here is why the importance of, again, the sacraments. Now he's going to be very, very critical of Catholicism, and most specifically the Vatican, which he believes is actually a facilitator of the satanic abuse that he's going to be describing, which, you know, hard to disagree with once you've kind of looked into the infiltration of the Catholic Church. But I don't know if he knows much about orthodoxy, and I would suspect, based on some of the stuff he says, he may view orthodoxy in a very similar light. But in regards to the actual reality of the sacrament of the Eucharist, this is exactly the point, that we are part of the bloodline of the high priest of Christ, Christ's redemption, the salvation and sanctification of humanity. And so as the Satanists, as he's going to talk about, do the exact opposite, that they sort of feast on the blood of living people. We feast on the blood of the Most High. And this is really the ending, as I've talked about before in the video that I did on Christ civilizing the world. Cannibalism is something that Christianity explicitly ended. And even though we were then called cannibals by the Romans during the persecution era because of our beliefs in the sacraments. But just want to make that point. And guys, Nathan Reynolds has his own YouTube channel. You can see it right here, Nathan Reynolds, The Linen Railroad. So if you do want to follow more, he's still posting content. I think he just posted a video the other day that you can go to his YouTube channel and get that. And so I'll just share this link of what we're watching because the actual YouTube channel that this interview is from is all cut up. You don't get the full almost 4 hours. You only get that on Nathan's channel. So I assume the gentleman of the original podcast gave him the entire video, and he just uploaded the whole thing to his YouTube channel. So anyways, you can follow it more if you want to, but let's get back to it.
Wild. I didn't. Last year in the Christmas season, I took the last 2 weeks of the year off, and I had other people host the show. And my friend Joel did an episode that he called Good Nephilim. And he kind of goes into this idea of Nephilim being able to be redeemed.
Yeah.
And it's a concept that I feel like has not been tapped into a whole lot. And he did on my show for I think the first time. And since then he's kind of uncovered more information to back up his claims. But having, you know, a real life Nephilim here, not kidding. But it's just it kind of goes into that concept, you know. Yeah. And so that's why I asked you, because I was like, hold on, like that's pretty wild. Like, you know, to be like, have I ever encountered somebody who comes from that bloodline? Maybe. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, but how many times do you come across somebody that does come from that bloodline and acknowledges it, knows it? You know, that's another thing. And so that's why I wanted to ask you that. So you kind of hit on the childhood stuff right there in that kind of description. Was it something that came from complete childhood, where it's like from your earliest memories, it's just been kind of manipulated and jacked up? And what was that like for you growing up?
The Reynolds family on my father's side, they're all from the East Coast out here, and they're a dynastic family. You know, like my great-grandfather, a man named Don Potter Reynolds, was the architect, the head of engineering for the president, as the president of the American Society of Civil Engineering back in the 80s. And he's the one who put the new torch in the Luciferian hand of the Statue of Liberty of Columbia. And so he's a master Mason Luciferian in that way. And he was so much of the shot caller for the family at that time, especially when I came into being. And but my dad left that thing and moved out to the Southwest and started a different empire. And so a lot of how it works in the families is you got two main approaches. If you've got unlimited access to wealth, power, like really, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about power, like unlimited raw power, where a phone call, the phone book, is far more powerful than the bank account, because it's who you know can open doors to power anywhere else in the entire world. And that's where everything was. So you can leave with nothing, but then you can go build. And if you need the phone book, there's a price to be paid. And the price to be paid is generally one of your children. This is like the reality accident. It seems bizarre to some, but a child is generally a chosen child out of the family, is given over as an offering to the family. And they're the ones who's going to go through this left-hand path. They're going to experience the desecration of their soul, their identity, and they're going to become an agent for the family that is owned completely. And there's like a legal trustee that is given over to it. There's a board of directors that sits over it. Like, these are real legal confines for how the wealth is distributed out there. And so in order to build your empire, you got to be able to go prove yourself. And that's what he ended up doing out in the Southwest. He moved to Arizona, an area called Flagstaff, Arizona. And where I was born, that is a place that's a high place, Mount Humphreys. It's a volcanic peaks that sit there. And the top of it is where the Hopi Indian and a lot of people had gathered forever to commune with the fallen. They believed that the sons of the sky would come down every season at the winter solstice, and they would abide from the winter solstice to the summer solstice there. And so this was a place where they would give their daughters over to them. This is Hopi mythology, like 101, you know, and they would make these kachina dolls, which were an effigy of the what I would say is a watcher angel that would come, and the daughter would be given to him, and she would place that over her bed throughout her life, you know, and that's her familiar spirit, right? That's where I was born into. And the people that still practice that old religion, that's the way I refer to it, they still do this. And they still take their children up there to give them over to them on these high days. And so I was born into that, and I was born through that seed line and into that ritual magic world. And but my mother's side are extreme Catholics and Jesuits through and through. And so her father ran a different operation in Southern California, which was much more based on the child exploitation side of the equation. And he operated out of Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Lake Havasu, for those of you that are unfamiliar, sits in the absolute desert border of Arizona and California, and it has the Colorado River that's been dammed up, and they created an artificial lake there. And it was a secret military base back in World War II. That's called Site 6. And it was a stopover point crossing the desert for soldiers going there. And they would made it into a rest and recuperation area. And so it was a party city from its foundation. It had a lot of underground structures that were built into it as a refueling point. And in the 1960s, a guy named Robert P. McCulloch bought it. And he bought it, and he also purchased the London Bridge that crossed the River Thames, and he had it shipped over here stone by stone. And while they were doing that, they excavated 80 bodies that were entombed inside it in a practice that's called annulment, where you would sacrifice a person and bury them alive in the walls of the foundation. And so there's all these chambers in this facility of the London Bridge where they would do torture and all kinds of ritual stuff. But this is why the sing-song nursery rhyme, the London Bridge is falling down, falling down. That's a nursery rhyme to talk about how you have to give your children over to the government so you can hold up the London Bridge, and they would literally take their children. This is in the history book of the museum at Lake Havasu City. You can see these bodies of these children that were sacrificed inside the walls of that space. So he bought that as a charged object. He bought that as a portal mechanism, and they built in Lake Havasu City with another designer from the Disneyland, and they literally built a pleasure island. That's what it was facilitated for, and they designed it so that it would be a retirement community that would facilitate the exploitation of children. And that's exclusively what that city was founded and built for. And so that the original founders of that operated out of Knights of Columbus predominantly as a wing of the Jesuits. And that's the business down there. It's an industry to cover up childhood. You got a bunch of old men running around with little boys, and everybody thinks they're grandchildren and nephews and nieces and all that rest. And so all along that area down there is where I would be taken from my earliest days and shattered, abused, traumatized, systemically so. But it's for behavioral modification purposes. That's the end goal of the abuse, is to shatter your willingness to resist and to break your will. And once they own you and you have been woefully convinced you can never get out, you give in. And that's what happened. I became the person who I was, died, and the person they wanted me to become was what was born out of that disgusting Phoenix ashes,
And this obviously relates to MK Ultra, the shattering of the psyche of individuals. You have to do it in traumatic ways. Montauk Project as well, where I've read stories, can't verify it, wasn't there, but they claimed that they would put people in, perpetual states of orgasm, traumatize them, shatter their psyche, and then reprogram them with whatever the narrative or the new psychological personality that they want through orgasm, through sexual stimulation in one way or another. And then once the psyche is fragmented, you can operate in different domains and be totally unconscious of one personality, maybe the personality you have during the day versus the personality that you have during the night. So, so far, everything that Nathan Reynolds is talking about is, and I think for most of the chat as well, this is all consistent with our own research and my research and understanding of brainwashing, mind programming, and of course, Satanism.
All right, how long does that process take? I mean, was this like just a few years of your childhood, or was this like a constant thing throughout your teen years, or what?
I mean, every individual is different. How long does it take to break a dog? That was the approach they took with me. You find out everybody has different talents and giftings and capabilities and capacities. And so in the beginning phase, a lot of it is you're just raising them up a little more normally. There's a lot of early trauma stuff that's hard to articulate and can be messy with memory. But as I got older, like 5 and 6 years old, man, it became very apparent that I had a desire for justice. That was like the sole deepest desire that I had, was I wanted people to know freedom, because I had been so deprived of it from day one. And there's this practice of switching mothers. You'll have a cult mother, and then they have your regular mom, and then they create this trauma bonding so that you'll bond with anybody. that they want you to do. And this happens by taking you away from your mom and your dad constantly, and giving you new mom and dad, new uncles, new aunts, right? And so you're living in this constant state of destabilization. And so it's as that destabilization happens and that patterning is built up, that's when a lot of the programming comes in to stabilize these new personalities and these new pursuits and endeavors. But I had this zealousness to see injustice stopped, and they preyed on that. And so they gave me opportunities to fight back against these perverts who were abusing children. And they would build up in me this rage, this need for vengeance. And then they would let me release that on somebody. And in the beginning, it was people I knew were bad guys I'd seen abuse children. And I would slice their throats up, man. I would tear them to freaking ribbons. And I loved it because I finally felt like I could stop something that I knew was evil. And I thought this was the way to stop all these monsters in the world. I just wanted to hunt monsters in the night. I just wanted to go down in the tunnels and hunt. And that's what they kind of created in me, this just freak of a need to hunt. And then they would bury that away, and you go back to normal life, and you go back to Christian school, and you go back to the regular life, and your parents act like it's just normal, you know, but they're like, you got to have cover stories for why your child's all beat up and bruised and your space is smashed. And like, I've had multiple reconstructive plastic surgeries from fights, you know, like fighting for my stinking life. You got to have cover stories. We would move around constantly. My parents would move us around sometimes every 6 months or not. But once you have a friend or a teacher or somebody notices, starts asking questions, or you start bonding with somebody that's outside the cult, they're not going to tolerate that. And so we would move all the time. And now my sisters on the other side, they weren't roped into this thing. I was in a male cult. This is the Brotherhood of the Snake down in the Havasu. But this is, my sisters weren't caught up in the same thing, but they were caught up by the family as a whole. And so this carried on, and we moved into this place called Shola Pine Top, Lakeside, Arizona. And this is where an area, they would move to these specific high places where the veil is really thin. There's a very famous story about a guy who had an alien encounter out there, Snowflake, Arizona. And this is an area where I was right on the Apache reservation, White Mountain Apache Reservation, was 100 yards from my door, out into the Apache reservation to these specific high places and do these rituals and this ritual magic. And a lot of that involved, that was when it was the worst to me, because I was old enough to understand how vile what was happening, you know, in ritual magic. And at the same time, I was the most readily influenced by the family side of the equation. I thought the family and the military was the way out. And I hated this occult side of it because I saw men become monsters physically in front of my eyes. Things come out of people's mouths, other things come through their eyes. Like I witnessed enough transfiguration to know that this stuff is 100% stalking in the darkness. And I don't want that to rule me forever, you know, but it was hard to not resist, you know, you're in it.
Well, so, all right, seeing things like that, like you say, all right, so you said you saw men become monsters. Is that metaphorically or literally?
It's literally. I've seen men do nasty things like an animal, but then I've seen men become not people.
Like literally not
change. People. Yeah.
Okay.
And there is like lycanthropy, and there's these understandings of what the Watchers are capable of doing that most people are just woefully ignorant of. And that's why they're perishing, is because they lack a basic understanding of history. And one of the predominant understandings of what a Watcher, specific class of celestial beings, is capable of is augmenting itself. They can shapeshift. That is by their nature. They're literally called metaskizmazotoi in the Greek in the New Testament. And it's because he says it's marvel not, because Hasatan you could say like transforms himself. That's a good word for it. But he shapeshifts himself into an angel of light. And his messengers, his apostles, disciples, they do the same thing. And he's like, this is because they are capable of becoming anything they want to be in order to deceive on one side of the equation. And that's what they'll do. And so when people start engaging in these necromantic rituals and other stuff, and they start to seek the embodiment of these celestial ones, they can get these things on them and in them, and they can't contain them. And some of these guys who are messing with this stuff, who don't come from the bloodline, are incapable of cohabitating like a parasite, and they feed off of each other, and they can't handle it. And so that's why families are recruited from these bloodlines, and children are recruited out, even if they don't know anything about it. Like you said, the vast majority of people who come from these bloodlines, there's a lot of muddying of the waters. There's a lot of purity that's been changed. There's a lot of half-breeds. And there's a lot of quarter breeds, right? There's a lot of people that don't know this stuff, and they start to get into lesser magic. And all of a sudden, it's like the doors of everybody open to them. But that's why. It's because they can host these things better. Whereas those that don't, they get taken over by this stuff, and they can't change back. They can't return, in a sense. Like, people become completely possessed and are incapable of expelling the darkness after that. And who do you turn to? You're going to go to the Catholic guy who's all into the same thing that you're into, you know? Like, most people don't understand what a real deliverance is required for somebody that has gone down this far down, where they are consuming people. Like, that's a deep, devastating psychological, spiritual shock. Physical, your liver, like the health. This is why I'm huge into health, because I physically had to try to find ways to help people who have done all of these things. Like, the consumption of human blood does horrific things to the human body, you know? And this is a major practice within this. These families do drink blood. That's why we have these vampire class of people. It's not some kind of myth. People consume blood in order to extend their life force. Like, this is a normal thing. You got billionaires today who admitted on Joe Rogan podcast and other places where they're like, yeah, I used the blood of my son and all that. Like, you don't understand, this is a religion, you know, and this is a highly effective means of augmenting yourself. And so these Watchers will give people this power. Their priest class will dispense that to people who want to go into, you know, like what I come from down there in the Apache reservation was the the people that slip between realms and become animals, you know. And it's
you are hitting things that are confirming so many things that like I speak hypothetically about, almost in the sense that like I believe but I can't prove kind of thing. But like for instance, years ago I had a guy on the show, and he didn't say it on the show, so I usually don't say his name, because some people know who I'm talking about, some people don't. But because he didn't say it on the show, I don't know why he didn't say it on the show. But he said that he was a former, I guess I forget, like Satanist or whatever. Like he came from a deep line of this stuff, and he said at one point, he says at one point people have to make a decision whether they're going to go the vampire route or the werewolf route. And he said that he was told by somebody who went the werewolf route that he should go vampire, because doing werewolf is like the most painful thing you'll ever experience in your entire life. I don't know. I can't say factually how true that is or not, but you're saying a lot of similar things, and now you're saying that there's traversing realms involved with this. So are you saying that there are people who are traversing realms because of their ability to change into?
So it looks like we got a few questions. Dano's saying, anybody know what bloodline he's referring to? Yeah, you may have missed it. Maybe you just joined the stream. He's talking about these certain elite satanic cults and these global elites, and how they believe that their bloodline is unique because they have mated with fallen angels. And he's referring back to the Nephilim and the Watchers and these. So if you're not familiar and this is all new to you, the Nephilim are mysterious beings or people in the Bible traditionally imagined as being of great size and strength, or alternatively beings of great power and authority. The origins of the Nephilim are disputed, some including the author of the Book of Enoch, which is not a canonical book within the Bible, but one that many people read in regards to the fallen angels and their mating with humans. So again, it refers back to biblical passages like Genesis 6:1-4. The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and they bore children to them, the same were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown. And so it talks about how they were in the earth. And I don't know the Hebrew. I don't know the if that's the accurate translation or not. I assume it is, but it refers back. I mean, Nathan Reynolds is going to talk about how caves and the underworld and literally being underground is often indicative of where these rituals take place. So they commune with them at the high places, and then they go underneath as well. So it's them. They believe, and according to Nathan, that the veil, which I do believe is true, that's why you see so many places and mountaintops in which these pagan traditions perform their sacrifices, because they believe that's where the veil between the supernatural realm and the natural realm is more thin, especially during certain points in the calendar year related to celestial movements, all that type of stuff, and that they then offer children, be it daughters or boys, to these fallen entities. And so he's claiming that that's what, whether you believe it or not, he's saying that that's what these people who are part of these satanic cults, that's what they believe. That's why they believe their blood is so unique and why they're more powerful than the average person. So just wanted to make that clear. And I also want to give a special thank you to David Gessner. He throws in $10 over on Streamlabs. No comment. Thank you so much, David. And over on the Dono chat, Justin Hinley threw in $5, said, keep up the great work, brother. Well, thank you very much, Justin. Do appreciate it. Again, we got a lot more to get through. So bear with me. I'll be stopping once in a while. And somebody asked, what's Nathan's YouTube channel? We're on it right now. So you can see it at the bottom here. Nathan Reynolds, the Linen Railroad. This is his YouTube channel where he still talks about this stuff. And it's only more recently that he's kind of come out publicly to really expose everything that's going on. So this was posted 1 month ago on his YouTube channel. I believe the interview was done 3 months ago. So this is relatively recent in regards to Nathan Reynolds talking about all this stuff. But anyways, let's continue.
Into these things, or are those two separate categories? Or sometimes the same? I
would say it like this. The reason that there's these First Nation people have preserved these priest class, right? Just all across the world. This isn't just like localized to white European people. There are people here who practice this type of same old religion, and they call them skinwalkers. That's a name for them, right? But these witches and warlocks that practice these things, you know, they go and rob graves and they take the infants' bones out, they grind them into powders, you know, and they use that as poisons, you know, like that. So the Jesuits was this like massive assassination team training group that was operating there that started training me. Well, then it was like, you needed to learn this spiritual side of assassination and hunting and stalking. And that's where the skinwalkers and the Navajo and the Dene are like they have a different priest class that does that. And so that's what I got put out there for, because they do stuff like slipping between realms. We call them shadow walkers in the industry. Like these are guys that have this means to go between spaces. And so whether you can't hear them, you can't see them, you can't detect them, they're not on thermal, but there's certain types of ways that you can detect them. So it's like you have to get kind of raised up into these arts. And these are like, this is why we call it like, this is to me the realm of Azazel. I'm just convinced that this is all Azazel's kingdom in that realm and that side of it. And people are just branching off of his tree of knowledge of good and evil side of it, you know, and he's ultimately the one that was teaching men these ways of war in that sense of it. But like, just like with what happened with Nebuchadnezzar, man, they cursed him with lycanthropy. Daniel warns him, hey, don't go down that road. You got a dream from the Most High, don't do it. And he did it anyway. He said the watchers are going to curse you. That's literally what they did, man. They cursed him and made him a beast. They took him down the lycanthropy road because that's what they do, man. His hair grew out, his nails grew out. Like he became a different thing that if you and I spotted it on camera, we would say it's a cryptid. We would call these things cryptids because we don't have a proper working knowledge of history and understanding why people call these things these names. But the vampire side of the equation, they tend to be much more human masquerading. Whereas you get much more feral production when people start to take this other route of becoming a beast. That's kind of the options that they give people in that world. But I believe a lot of the guys that you see out there or who are experiencing these things, they're loose assets for families. Like these are guard dogs on estates. Like that's literally, there was a training program I had to go to when I was 9 years old, and we'd go up to this farm in Michigan that was in the family, my dad's cousin, and they train all of these police, military, law enforcement, and VIP protection dogs, you know, but then they have other cages that are man-sized cages for other stuff, because that gets brought in by the families, you know, and it's like some of these are people that are just beasts, like physically people that are like not like the rest of us, strength-wise, speed-wise, power-wise, intelligence-wise. And then others of them are just unrecognizable as anything related to man. And so
is that their ability, their strength, intelligence, is that something that is brought on through ritual, or is it brought on through like medical injections? You know, like I've heard stories of, you know, military injecting, you know, people with things and they essentially become a super soldier. Is it that kind of stuff or a combination or what?
I think it's just both. It depends on who's got high tech and who's got the old tech. You know, the old tech is generally superior. The new tech has side effects. You know, when people are getting injections and are using, you know, recombinant DNA to start augmenting stuff, there's other variables that are unpredictable, you know, whereas if you just use a different spirit, you can predict what it's going to be. You know, that's like when a skinwalker kills, that's what you have to go through, man. I'm 9 years old and I have to sting and kill somebody with my hands, a friend, a person that I love, because my family was not somebody I loved. And so part of in order to be inhabited by these spirits that will shapeshift you and allow you to become a different creature, you're going to kill somebody that you love. And you're going to kill them with your bare hands. You're going to breathe in their life as they die. And it's when you do that this stuff comes on you. And that's the stuff that makes you convinced you can never be redeemed.
I believe it. So all right, there's so much to unpack. I'm trying to collect my thoughts. Let's just go with the assassin route. You were a kid being trained to do that. When you were doing it, did you have to transform? Was that part of the process for you, or did you ever have to never go down that route?
I didn't go that route. My route was being able to get by anything. Like you got to be able to invade anything and be able to familiarize yourself and be understanding of how to navigate and get past people's weaknesses or things' weaknesses. Like you want to train how to do infiltration and exfiltration with targets, hardened targets. You're going to have to learn how to get by guard dogs, physical guard dogs, wolf kind, you know, and then you're going to have to learn how to get by stuff that's like, they have a warlock that sits in this estate and they do ritual magic to do all these spells and incantations. You need to know how to get through that. So there's like, you get training by getting exposed to all these different variables so that you can be able to pierce through no matter what it is and eliminate somebody or plant something. It wasn't always just like assassination. That was an aspect of it, but a lot of it is counter-espionage and espionage. You're setting people up, right? Or you're trying to extract something. Like there's this project we'll have to get into more. It's called the Jason Project, which is a secret scientific military group that's now more publicly known. It's a consulting group for the smartest people in the entire world, but they had children. And so they started this junior Jason program where they're like, you know, we should all breed together, you know, and have these really super high intelligent children. Well, then they could be great spies. And so that's where you get into espionage as a major facet of this. That is, they get interlocked so heavily and you start to figure out that the vast majority of the people behind the scenes are not just connected to these religious orders, they're connected to the government. And that a lot of them are State Department employees. And this is how the United States military and government regulates and controls assets out of containment, people that are not doing what they're supposed to, that have information they shouldn't have, and they need to be eliminated, or you need to extract a piece of information from them. And so that's what really launched me into that realm, was right then in those mountains of the White Mountains is what they're called. But that was when I chose more of, I don't want anything. I want to not be in this cult side. It's not like that was respected, but it was acknowledged. And I got opportunities to do the side of it that I thought was high speed and low drag and looked way more freeing, which was the modern American soldier. I wanted that route. But you're designed to basically always be a spy. and that you're going to feed back the family what you want. And if you're going to be put in a position, we'll open the doors for you. And that's where all of that really was birthed out of, was there in the White Mountains. And then once that decision was made, my great-grandfather was brought back to our house in Colorado. He was located there, and my father signed me over to him. He got parental rights. He got bedtime rights with me at night for a few years until he was too sick to do anything about it. And my dad got access to the trust fund. And that was when everything went from like surface level poor middle class American to like planes, new cars, plane, new car, houses, bed and breakfasts. Like my family became wealthy. And I got thrown from freak show level werewolf Psychoville down in Arizona into the big city of Colorado Springs, which was military gods. You know, like military, it is the capital of the New World Order. Denver, the Front Range of Colorado, is 100% the place where the capital has been built and the infrastructure was laid. And so I got put into the military side of the projects there when I was a young teen. And that's where NORAD Space Command and all this underground facility from the United States Air Force Academy. And that's where I went into the military side of the equation. And that's where I stayed for quite a few years. That's
wild. I had a guy on the show a while ago. I don't want to rehash the story. I don't even remember what episode it was called or what I called it. I think it was a member show, but he was messing with something in his apartment, and somebody called in terroristic threats on him, and he had like all this like powder and stuff. Like he wasn't making bombs. I don't think he was making bombs, but like, anyways, the SWAT team came and raided his home or his apartment, and his brother called me. He's like, "Dude, why is the SWAT team at your apartment right now?" And he's at work, and so he panicked and he fled. And he this is in Colorado. He fled into the woods, and this is where the story from the show came up, because he's out in the woods, and all of a sudden, he's being hunted by translucent people shooting at him. And he said this lasted the entire night until he wound up getting to like a safe zone where it just kind of stopped, and he wound up turning himself in and cleared his name and everything. And I don't know, like I don't think he spent any time in jail, because he wasn't building bombs, but he panicked. Like he's the kind of guy, like if I remember correctly, he's a bug out guy kind of thing.
Oh yeah,
and so
it's happening. It's going down.
It's going down.
Heading to the hills.
We out. You know, like, I've been training for this. You know,
he's heading to the tunnel.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but that he said that was, if not on the NORAD property, it was right near it.
Randy West says, "I live 45 minutes from the Springs. I hate the aura of that city." Yeah, and obviously we know about Denver, Colorado Airport, the underground tunnels that are speculated about that. And of course, all the witchcraft and paganism at certain parts of Colorado, again, usually towards very high points around the Rocky Mountains. And Colorado Springs is, you know, filled with military and, according to Nathan Reynolds, tons of underground bases as well. So it all makes sense to me in regards to why Colorado and Denver specifically would be a strategic point for some of these people in the U.S. military as well.
Yeah, and so we theorize that he might have even just stumbled into a training exercise.
That's what you could call it.
Yeah,
that's a fun word.
So in other words, it was training. You know, like, oh, here's an easy target. Yeah. You know? So what you're saying is it's almost like you're confirming that there is a lot of high level stuff happening there that would be almost sci-fi to ordinary people.
That's where Nikola Tesla set up his entire laboratory system.
Same right?
Place. Oh yeah.
Wow.
This is a high place. So like you got to understand there's cardinal points across the earth, and you are well with this, but there's cardinal points where the veil is thin. It's like a real thing. It's not like some kind of like, it's a reality. It's like a physical, scientifically documentable event that takes place in some of these places. And that's why he chose that spot. That's why people, if you start to go to a place called Garden of the Gods, this gigantic sandstone feature that just sticks up at the base of 14,100.
I remember when I went to Colorado, what was it, back in 2018, I actually went to the Garden of the Gods outside Colorado Springs. And so I've actually been through this national park, was not aware of what he's getting ready to talk about.
10-foot Pikes Peak, this massive mountain. That's where Colorado Springs sits. And then it's a confluence of all these springs, these incredible hot, well, mostly cool water, but mineral-rich springs called Manitou Springs. That's where I ended up going to high school. It's the highest concentrations of witches in the United States per capita occupy that area, because it's a gigantic tunnel system that has been there from before the days of old. Always been there. People have been there, and they've been doing these kinds of participatory acts. Well, the United States military moved into there on a huge degree in the 1940s and began to build during the Cold War, they began to build a lot of tunnel systems. And this is where the continuity of government operations headquarters was going to be when it came to the central part of the United States. And so that Denver's ideally situated because you have the Great Plains to the east, and you have these gigantic cascades of mountains, the Rocky Mountains, as a shield behind you. And so that's why the continuity of government, if it ever relocates from the East Coast, it will go there. And that's where the base of major military operations has embedded itself. And so when somebody stumbles on something that might be a training, like you call it, like these are just basic kit that a lot of our soldiers have that's just not on the TV yet, you know, where soldiers are needing to be stealth technology, you know, they're rubbing thermal creams on themselves to hide from any type of thermal imaging software. This is like low end of the tech side of the equation. But Fort Carson, which is where I was stationed, that is a massive military base. And that's where, but abreast to that, there's 6 military bases surrounding Colorado Springs. So it is a gigantic ring of this, including deep underground military bases and stuff that goes up to Denver, and it's interlocked all the way up to Wyoming, where all the communications cables are for the entire country meet. So it's a really big area for all of that. And then you have all of the spiritual side of stuff that starts in the mountains, in particular in the Front Range and Rampart Range Road. So like my family ended up moving into this little town just outside of Colorado Springs, and like giant 5-pointed star, cardinal point, where everyone gathers on the high days, all the witchcraft, right? All that stuff goes on in there, and that's embraced out there culturally. It's like the norm, and it's like normal that your children are a part of this stuff. And so it's good to raise children in sick families in that environment. So that's what that hub caters to. Whereas Colorado Springs on the other side is focused on the family, and it's like die-hard Christian side, you know, and it's like, yeah, but all the creepy occultist people are on that side of Manitou Springs. You know, we keep them over there where they have the coffin races and all the rest of it, you know.
Wow. So we're gonna do an overtime with you. We're gonna focus heavy on the military experience, but I'm assuming the answer, and it's just yes or no. You don't need to go detail. Have you ever been in an deep underground base?
Yes,
of course you have. I figured you have, and it's probably not once. I definitely want to get into that for the overtime for sure. I want to kind of backtrack a bit to a couple things. One, you mentioned about people transforming their bodies, and the Lycan is definitely that route. We've had people on the show, lots of people who have encountered these dog man type creatures. The one that comes to mind is episode 335. Kyle was the groundbreaking episode for me going into the dogman topic. I've had it before, but this was just like, whoa. It was short. Long story short, he's 15 years old, hunting with his grandfather in Kentucky, Danny Boone National Forest, the upper side of it. And it's middle of the night. His grandfather's in the truck because he was older, so they had radios. The dogs get on a scent. You hear him howling. He comes up on the scene, and he can hear his dogs fighting with coyotes. The coyotes go off. He only had 2 dogs out there. And in that fight, he heard his younger dog run off as well. So now the older dog, who's a really good hunter, really strong dog, is by himself, fights off these coyotes. They come back in, and it sounded like they came back in a pack almost, and started whooping up on his hound dog. I think it's a hound dog. Don't hold me to that, but hunting dog. And then he hears his other dog come back in. When his other dog came back in, the fight changes. Coyotes are gone. He comes onto the scene. His older dog goes back to treeing the raccoon in the tree. He comes over, pats him on the head, and he hears his younger dog behind the tree chowing down on a coyote. He goes around the tree, and it's not the younger dog. The younger dog never came back. This was a very large dog on all 4. He said it was so big that it was holding a coyote by the ribcage in its mouth. And he said that when he came up on it, it looked at him, and it stood up on its hind legs, took chase. That it unfolds a whole scene where basically his hunting dog saved his life. His hunting dog did survive, but barely. He thought his dog had died at some point. That story that he shared on the show, is there any way outside of what you shared that it could be something else other than somebody that transformed from human to upright walking dog that maybe was one of those people who weren't able to handle that and could never change back? Is that in your mind what that would be? Or do you think that there are actual creatures out there that maybe come from other realms, or maybe just like some people? I don't personally subscribe to the idea that Bigfoot's just this hairy primate that we can't catch. Yeah. I think there's more woo-woo stuff to it. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's along those lines? What are your thoughts on that side of stuff?
That's a great question. Man, that's brutal. Because I think on one side of it, I think we really do have an entire subspecies of creatures that do exist mostly inside the earth, and they are not readily surface dwelling anymore. And I do believe, like in Lake Havasu City, Arizona, man, inside the London Bridge is a massive room, like a throne room, where they engage in this magic. But this Brotherhood of the Serpent, they call upon Nahash, the dragon. And
would that be in normal terms Satan?
Yeah, most people know him as Satan, right? Yeah. But like there is a great red dragon, like the physical, that's what he looks like in reality. He was cursed, and man, he made him a monster. Yahweh made him a monster. And they would commune with these things. There's 13 grandfathers take 13 of their grandsons, and they bring them into these rooms and do these things on these specific times and rituals for all kinds of stuff. But the dragons tell them the future. This is like always what they've been able to do. It's like Satan leads Yeshua up onto a great high place and says, I shows him all the nations of the earth and all their kingdoms and their reigns in a moment of time. He shows them the future. That's what they do. They can show you what's to come. This is why we get hunted by them. He knows if we're going to be part of his adversaries. He knows if we're going to be on his enemy list. And that's why he targets us at our youth. That's what so happens. So many people, they're like, why has my life been a nightmare from the beginning? It's because you have a purpose and a destiny that adversary absolutely categorically does not want to come to pass. It's a real life Terminator scenario. And so he sends his assets in to destroy people, to ruin their life. And those meeting places happen when they sit down in these rooms and they try to call up these creatures. It's from inside the earth. It wasn't like ethereal mist. They were physical things that would come out of these tunnels, and they would come into the room and they would consume the offerings that were given there. And then the words of the Nahash would come forth and they would prophesy to these guys. Like, they would prophesy out of the mouth of the serpent what each one of their life callings, their shots. He's the shot caller, man. It's like a pimp from prison. He's calling the shots, and you had a bunch of fallen watchers that were in prison in Tartarus for a reason. Yeah, but they got ways of getting messages out, just like the cronies in jail today, you know. And that's what a lot of people are dealing with. They think they're dealing with the top dog, and they're like, I'm finally into the big game. And it's like you're dealing with, you know, a private in the hierarchy, but he can masquerade like a general. And so some people are really dealing with death himself, and some of them are dealing with one of his princes. And this is what my family's covenant was with the dragon. They didn't mess around, man. They went all the way to the chain of command. They uncovered a bunch of my great-grandfather's grandfather was an archaeologist who dug into Indian mounds out in the Ohio River Valley. And they started finding a priest class that was these serpent worshipers. And that's what they started calling upon. And they started trying to wake up and rise up Wachiblos, which is these deities, these dragon fire deities that
this demand. In Ohio?
Where these mounds were found, the Ohio River Valley. Yeah.
We're talking about serpent mounds?
Yeah. Well, this wasn't specifically, not that I'm aware of that it was specifically a serpent mound, but it was a mound that was in an area that was now being farmed.
Okay.
And so whether or not it was specifically a serpent mound, it was not identified as that. But they ended up finding a lot of these ancient tombs. They found the writings of this priest class, and they started.
And these mounds, if I remember right, the ones in the Ohio Valley are technically could be some of the largest megalithic structures in the world. Now it's all covered in grass and it's all grown over, but from some of the research that I've looked at, they were ginormous back in the day.
They started using their magic to call back up these fallen ones, and they were. The part of the trade is the priest class.
Oh, thank you so much. Rigovich just gifted 5 COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you so much, sister. Truly appreciate that. And welcome. Jesse was gifted a membership. Randy West, Mean Eugene, Ed the Wave, and Redfish were all gifted COTEL Crew memberships by Rigovich. Thank you so much, sister, for that. Really do appreciate the support. And guys, smash that like. Tons more is coming. So sit still. Put your thinking caps on. And if you want to support my stream, feel free to send in super chats on Dono Chat, Streamlabs, or here on YouTube. And if you're feeling generous like Rigovich, feel free to give some COTEL Crew membership. Truly appreciate you, sister. Thank you.
Has all this secret knowledge that they then use to rule the kings with. And that's what they wanted. So that's how the Reynolds family, this is also documented in a book called The Gilded Leaf by Patrick Reynolds, who was a bloodline descendant specifically and in the actual inheritance of the Winston cigarette company, you know, the tobacco empire that ended up buying Nabisco Foods that ended up running the world.
What relation is it to you? Like an uncle?
I don't know that I am a bloodline relative of that guy.
Oh, okay.
Patrick Reynolds specifically. My Reynolds family is the one that does the black gold stuff, all the secret, disgusting, dirty money. They're the white launderers of the money, right? But you got to have your seedy, corrupt group. And that's what my family did. They did all the dirty stuff.
Wow.
And so but in his book, in his firsthand account, they talk about the Joshua coin and them using a coin that was from Judas that he betrayed Yeshua with, and the 30 pieces of silver that was the blood guilt money. They would touch that silver coin to anything they wanted, and it would grow an empire. The cost was always massive bloodshed and a massive demand of life. And that's always what the serpent required. He wanted life. And so like on one side of the equation, that's what they used to build the Reynolds empire. That's what they used to go down Alcoa and all the aluminum industry and all of the stuff they spray on us and the stuff they poison us with and inject us with and all the variables of complexities of targeting that they've done against us. That all comes from that covenant that those two brothers sat down, did, and entered into a blood covenant with the dragon, man. And this is what the fruit of it was. Well, my family entered into that on a different route through this priest class thing. And that's what they would practice down there. And that's the same old religion that people have been using a long time. So on one side of it, I've seen physical beings that are definitely not like our animals up here come out of these spaces from inside the earth. I've seen in deep underground military bases, dogmen, like you would kind of describe them, some more humanized. And I think a lot of those were experimentation and genetic splicing. I think a lot of that was gene editing stuff that I've seen. But I do believe that some of these things are holdovers from the old days. They're the last of their kinds, and they've been breeding them, right? And I believe that that's the stuff that's prophesied that's going to come back out and cause the hearts of men to stop for fear of looking after these things that are coming up on the earth. You know, that's why everywhere I went throughout my youth, I could go to these tunnels and these caves and call out, and I could hear them. They would call back, you know, and it's like, it's a seductive power that.
I just want to make a point when he was talking about the sort of magical ritual of the 30 pieces of silver that Judas was given, and that these satanic cults sort of utilize this, and the exchange is always blood for more financial power. Surely the immediate connection that I had is, again, the U.S. military industrial complex, what's going on in the Middle East with Israel. All this money, you know, the fact that the U.S. government can send $8 billion to Ukraine, $8 billion to Israel to kill more and more people. Israel just killed, what was it? Over 7,000 people have been killed inside Lebanon. The vast majority of which were civilians, wasn't Hezbollah. And you think about the US dollar, you think about the banking system, you think about how all this stuff is connected. And in my mind, it begins to make a little bit more sense.